Yay, we're live. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
Yay, I'm so glad you're here. Hello, everybody watching. As you probably know, I'm Dr. Lisa Neer. I'm a mezzo-soprano and composer and coach. And I have an interview series, Think Small. This is episode 2. I'm super excited with soprano. I forgot to ask you how to say your last name.
It's okay.
Lose mistake.
This will be like the reveal. Lamprea.
Lamprea. Hi, Stephanie Lamprea. We've met. We met on the internet, which is why I didn't know how to say your last name. But thank you for coming on to this interview series today. Stephanie is an amazing performer of contemporary music, everything from operatic technique to extremely experimental and theatrical works, just a complete virtuosa. And I'm really excited to have her on this interview series because over the last year, you have released not just one, not just two, and actually not just 3, but I saw on Bandcamp 4. That was my mistake when I advertised this interview. 4 volumes of tiny works from quarantine. And I thought, what better project to talk about on this interview series than your tiny work? So hi, Stephanie, again. Thank you for being here. And I would love for you to tell us the story of let's just start with the first volume or the first pieces. How did the tiny works from quarantine get started? What are they? What was that process like for you?
Sure. So the tiny works are collections of 1-minute works for unaccompanied voice. The project sort of happened haphazardly. I was shortly when the pandemic began and we were all in lockdown. A few days in, composer Matthew Kennedy put a call on Facebook for performers to perform short works for him. And so I typed on Facebook, like, yeah, I'll do it. And he wrote me a short work and I sang it, put a video on Facebook, and I thought like, all right, that was cool. And then I got a couple of emails from other composers being like, oh, you're performing works. Here's something that I've written for you. I was like, okay. Great. And like the next day, I like put a video up, put another video up, and it just started like to accumulate. And I thought, oh, this is a thing. Like, great, this is awesome. And so I put a call on my Twitter being like, anyone who wants to write me a work, and suddenly I just got a flurry of emails and a flurry of scores, and it was incredible. At the time I was just doing video recordings and just posting those, and then after a while I thought, oh, I should actually like record these like for real. And so I took out my Zoom mic and I found the most secluded place in the apartment I was staying in, and I just started recording. My practice sessions every day were just 10-15 minute warm up, 15 minutes 20 minutes of recording one song, and then 15-20 minutes of a video for a future song that I would put up. And it just became this ritual for me. And so eventually when I had enough works, then I started just releasing them on Bandcamp, and then here we are 4 albums later. It just was an incredible journey.
Oh my gosh, that's really inspiring, especially because I think it's neat how you sort of jumped on this idea from Matthew, who was on the first episode of this interview series, and then you sort of rolled with it. And I love that because I think there's a lot of times in our lives as classical musicians, a lot of us have gone to school and we've made those, what am I taking every semester for 4 years, or what is my master's recital going to be, or my 3 master's recitals going to be? We have a lot of planning, and that serves us well in many ways. But you also took on a spirit of sort of being in the moment and adapting to life, and that led to something really neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was really grateful for that. Normally, in the before times, I suppose, normally I give myself a lot of preparation for works I'm performing, on stage or whatnot. And suddenly I had this very short period of time to put together work after work. And fortunately, the pieces were short enough where I could do it, but it allowed me to learn how to practice very efficiently, and also to just trust my technique and trust musical interpretations and see them as not static choices that, my sense of technique or my sense of musicality could change from day to day, but each perspective was still valid. And so after putting this whole project together, I came out a better singer. Actually, I learned how to practice better. I learned how to value my voice better. I was really surprised by that. It was great.
Yeah, I love that, especially in a year when, there have been some ups and downs, I think, for a lot of musicians technique wise that you discovered something beautiful about your own practicing in your own voice. Like, that's such an uplifting message. I love that.
Yeah. I'm really grateful for the project and for the time.
I love that. And it sounds like you created some parameters that you started with, like, for example, that first piece from Matthew was like around a minute. And then you were talking about your sort of process of how much time you were giving yourself to learn and record. Like, can you tell us more about that? Because I'm very interested in how performers and composers and artists manage their creation processes so that these amazing projects can happen. I think that's really exciting to share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. As a preface, the 1 minute mark was really helpful in order to still like place value on people's compositional work and time. I didn't have money to pay composers to write pieces, which is heartbreaking for me. But at the time, I thought 1 minute of work, if it's consensual with performer and composer, like, if everyone's donating your time willingly, that's enough. Where it's not, devaluing the time it takes to write like a really amazing piece of music. And then, it also just gave me time to do some really detailed work on a short piece of music. As a singer, I can't, this, Lisa, like, we can't practice for hours on end like instrumentalists physically. And I think every musician has their own period of time they practice, whether it's long or short, still valid. So for me, usually it's about an hour in the morning. And so I really try to regiment that time so that I can still feel accomplished in a way. I try to have small goals, which doesn't sound like great.
No, I think I love that you're sharing that. I think it's great.
Yeah. I like to have like sort of like bite-sized kind of things, because I can be very hard on myself and hold myself to a very high standard. And sometimes walking away from a practice session or recording session or performance, not reaching these lofty goals can be like very detrimental, and it can affect the next few days of practice. So what I found is, especially with these short pieces, I had short goals. It's like, well, I'm going to get this one phrase right. I'm going to have this nice breath support to it, or I'm going to like do this nice diminuendo, or like whatever, and even if it's just like really unlocking the potential one phrase, I could walk out of a practice room being like, I did that, and having those small goals every day slowly build confidence in one's instrument and one's whole artistic practice. So the small bite-sized goals, very, very helpful to me, at least.
I love that. I mean, we're talking about think small on this whole interview series, and that is, I think, is so powerful, especially in terms of a lot of the music that you perform, which is often very experimental and very avant-garde. Even a set of notes or a phrase or a gesture can take a lot longer to learn than 4 measures of Schubert in terms of notes, rhythms, or pitch content, sound world. Then you have the technique and the expression, of course, that you could delve into any piece forever. But I think that most performers who do contemporary challenging music like you do a lot of, and that quite a few of these pieces are taking advantage of your skill, that's a mindset shift from let me learn the notes and rhythms in one day of my next Schubert leader.
Yeah, I think for me that virtuosity that's in a lot of contemporary music was actually kind of freeing. I found that for me personally, and I don't want to like speak for other singers, but like in college, I got a classical voice degree, and I felt very not limited. There's a lot of pressure for me in like putting together like Schubert or Mozart or something, because you learn the pitches, the rhythms, the dynamics, but then there has to be this like pristine factor to it, and this like caressing of the music, which some singers have naturally, and it's like amazing. And I just felt like I didn't have the confidence to feel like, yeah, I have it, like, oh, I sound great or whatever. And there's something about contemporary music, especially avant-garde stuff, where I could feel like I can just like throw my voice places and be a little bit more like a gymnast, and not worry so much about being like pretty all the time, and just really lean into expression and think about what expression is, whether it's like in or outside the beauty box. And that the kind of music feels much more freeing to me, and I feel that I could work on perfecting that a little more. Not that, my singing's ever perfect, like not by a long shot, but I had the confidence to like feel like a professional approaching that kind of music instead of feeling like I'm never good enough for like Donizetti or Bellini or whatever.
Oh my gosh, the weight of some of those pieces and the studio recordings by some of the greatest singers and these perfectly mastered. I mean, yeah, I think that's such a fascinating part of the standard rep, versus some of the pieces that people haven't ever heard before or haven't heard as many times before. And I definitely can relate to that as a performer too, the freedom to be yourself. And I mean, you're talking about sort of the beauty box and the sounding pretty. I mean, there's something really feminist in what you're talking about too, I think. For me, that I don't know, that resonated with me. I don't know if you think about that as a feminist way of approaching singing, especially in classical music.
I do think so. I think that this is an opinion. I think for women, there's more of a pressure to like, at least in the operatic world, to fit into this mold of like the beautiful lyric soprano voice, especially in conservatory training now, like post the golden era where we listen to like, like Mirella Freni or like Beverly Sills or, and in the golden era, there's a plethora of really not only amazing singers, but very unique sounding singers. But I think now conservatory training is a little more like, we should sound like them, don't sound like yourself, sound like what has been defined as like beautiful. And that's slowly changing back. There are like some music programs that have amazing faculty that are really kind of steering away from that. But at least when I was in school, there is a lot of pressure to be like, you have to sound like this particular way to use your voice, this particular practice, or it's no good.
Nothing else you do will matter. Like no other expression or phrasing choice that I totally hear you. And I think even with the best teachers, I think that's really permeated a lot of the culture of classical singing right now, especially if you're talking about standard rep and opera track. And that's a really interesting angle on it. I'm so glad you brought it up. It's really complicated.
Yeah. I remember I was talking once with this jazz vocalist named Amirtha Kadambi, who's incredible. You should check out her work. And she talks about the voice. She has a classical training, and she talks about the colonization of the classical voice in the sense that like this operatic tradition really comes from this particular, period in like the 17th, 18th century in Western Europe. And there are so many other traditions of singing from different cultures and like way before opera that are beautiful and healthy, mind you. But for some reason, opera was touted as like the healthy way to sing, in addition to being the most beautiful. So it's like another layer of like,
oh my gosh,
singers being told what not to do with their voice. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know. Insane.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in singing and in classical music. And I think these are like really important conversations to be had. And they're ones that are often served by sort of stepping out and looking at the rep from outside, or by combining, different techniques and different ways to use our voice in the same piece. So I'm super glad that you brought that up. Going back a little bit to the project, and actually to this idea of like the perfect sound or the sound we're going for, you recorded and mixed these albums yourself, right?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I had help in mastering from a friend of a friend, but in terms of editing and putting stuff together, that was all me.
Okay, so for folks who don't know what that means, like, can you walk us through what was the different steps you were doing to record a piece yourself? What was that like?
Yeah, sure. So strictly for the Bandcamp things, so I would go into, bedroom of an apartment with my Zoom mic, just turn it on, and I would just sing through this piece. And because I had unlimited studio time, I could, and because the work was a minute or maybe a minute and change long, I did have a lot more time to do detailed work. The process is a little different than how I would do like a real album recording.
Sure.
Like right now I'm working on like an actual album thing, and my process is just like singing through the piece twice and then going back for major mistakes and then just being like, that's it,
Sure,
but for this, I kind of went through from the beginning, and if I messed up, I just like go back a phrase, keep going, I mess up, go back a phrase. And if I wanted to get something right again, I had the luxury to redo stuff. So when I finished that, then I have to edit, and it was like a mess editing, because I just had to listen to like the amount of times, just like God, like
Yeah.
the amount of mess ups. So I would listen to several takes of different phrases and then just like select them and just patch it together and be very mindful of like breaths sounding natural and not like different takes. And then just do like some Audacity magic on it, and then I would send the track over to a friend of mine who would do mastering and whatnot, and add reverb and all of that. So yeah, it was a lot of listening to myself and a lot of listening to me mess up on recordings, which in the beginning was a little concerning, but I think I got used to it pretty quickly.
And it seems like these were all unaccompanied, so that process also allowed for a little bit more of that. I mean, the fact that there wasn't someone else playing, right? You can sort of go, okay, there's one part of this that in a different setting I would have to do differently, but then you can kind of leverage the fact that you're alone and make it work for you, which I think is great. Like, why make yourself do 2 full takes when there's no one else to be coordinated with? It's not a chamber piece.
Right. I want to like clarify myself on that. There's a point where if you get like too much in the weeds, like I'm gonna do this one note like perfect, like that can turn into micromanaging, but also that can kind of lose the flow of a piece. So I find it helpful in recordings if you're working on like one note, to still just work on the phrase, work on the buildup. I mean, from a technical perspective, the preparation is always like key, but just from an artistic place, then thinking in phrases and thinking in flow will still keep you connected to your musicality, even while you're doing very detailed recording work.
I love that you brought that up. And I think that will be really useful for anybody who hasn't delved into this or who is and wants some new tips from what you've learned. I'm so glad you shared that. A lot of performers and composers, but I think particularly performers, because we're the ones executing the music that the composers are written. There's a lot of resistance and fear that can come up about releasing an album, even if you have saved up a lot of money and gotten some funding and are in a hall and have a bunch of support, which you didn't have. So I'm just curious, like, can you share anything about, did you experience some resistance or other internal like thoughts that made you wonder about, should I do this? And do you have any advice to people who might be experiencing that if they're seeing what you did and would like to do that?
Yeah. It actually, I want to speak to this, not necessarily with the album, but like, I guess with posting on social media and stuff.
Yeah.
So like, I tend to spam social media with a lot of like my practice videos and whatnot. And starting that was a lot scarier for me than like this album stuff. And because I always thought at the very beginning, like, oh, it's not perfect, it's not this, like whatever. But I read this book a while ago by, oh goodness, Austin Kleon, called Show Your Work. And it's like this book with like, it's a picture book. No, but it's one of those motivational books that has like little like bubbles with like text and whatever. But it talked a lot about, not necessarily self-promotion, but self-discovery and showing your process on social media, whatever kind of art you have, as a means to network, showing the process and not having this like perfection thing, because a lot of people are really interested in the process and interested in the expression behind the art you put out there. I mean, there are some situations where, the music needs to be pristine and like whatever, but like, especially for like albums, when you're really putting your truest and most natural self out there. I don't know. We're like rarely perfect. Like we're rarely perfect technicians, but I don't think that a lot of people are listening for that. Like I've listened to recordings where like, someone's voice cracks or like a missed note or whatever. And maybe I think like, oh, whoops, but like, it's not like an offense or anything. If I feel like expression behind that, that's what really grabs me. And so I would advise to people putting out, if they choose to put out albums or they choose to put out stuff on social media. I mean, it depends. Some people have a different relationship with showing their work, but for those who might feel that they want to but are nervous, again, I would say, to start with small things. Like I remember when I was just starting to put stuff on social media, like I practiced this piece today, blah. And at the very beginning, it was like, I'm going to choose like the easiest phrase, maybe not the thing I practiced today, but just something to be like, ta-da, you know. And you know, I get like 2 likes. I was like, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
It was very slow, but I started to just like build confidence in myself, and then start to post maybe longer sections, or start to even post stuff where it's like, okay, this bit is challenging and it's okay if I show you me messing up, like it's cool, you know. And thinking about showing my process rather than showing like perfect work really helped me be able to show my work and get myself out there. And with these albums, I very much felt that it was a showing of process. It was a showing of connection with composers during the pandemic. Yeah, and just like showing what excites me and what excites the composer with like text or like stuff that they want to experiment with. And that kind of like pushed me to put out these albums, and not so much like, I hope this is good, you know.
Oh, I love that. And I mean, I love that you're talking about thinking small and starting with things where you have like more confidence and feeling like, yes, I feel like successful at this thing that I'm sharing. And then that built into more courageous sort of sharing the process and opening up the parts that you're not feeling like are completely done. You know, I love that progression. And I think there's so much people can take inspiration from. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, like, from that first piece from Matthew Kennedy and into the first album, and then what else came from this project? I mean, now you have 4 releases. What surprised you? What impacts did this have on you, either like career or artistic joy? You've already talked about some of those, but has it led to any other ideas for what you might do next or future collaborations?
It led to, I know exposure doesn't pay the rent, but it led to a lot of exposure. It was kind of insane. I got a review after the second album from Cleveland Classical, which is very nice. And it was a very, very kind review to like all the artists on the album so far. So it was great for everyone. And a lot of notes from people being like, oh, like I really enjoy, you know, these albums you put out, or I enjoy your posts on social media, like, and just getting to know a lot more people in a very short period of time. And especially in the pandemic, because we can't see people in person, there's much more openness to just like networking with people from like different countries, different, you know, it was amazing. What else? I gained a lot of experience in putting pieces together really quickly and recording really quickly. As I mentioned, it definitely affected my practice. So then when I started getting some work again, for example, in last October, I gave it's my debut at Roulette Intermedium. And I gave like a full like 2-hour recital. It's a little long, too long, but like, I think like if it weren't for the pandemic project, I wouldn't have had enough time to practice that. And it was just kind of like throwing myself out there. So gaining that skill to just like, you know, level up and just like do the thing was really incredible. Yeah, just a lot of goodness really came out of it, and most importantly, connections with composers and really learning about what makes different composers tick. A lot more connection to sorry, I'm just like laundry listing this, but
no, it's great.
A lot more connection to like poetry and text that I wouldn't have otherwise known about or read about. So yeah, it definitely opened my mind up to lots of different ways of artistic thinking.
I love that. And I think it's so inspiring. And I hope that if people watching aren't familiar yet with this music, or even if you are, go back and listen. I'm going to link to the Bandcamp at the end of this interview, so it'll be in the comments. And you can go follow all the great things that Stephanie's doing. What is coming up next for you?
So actually, this end of September, I'm moving to Glasgow, Scotland, to begin a doctorate at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. And so it'll be a kind of like a DMA, except it's called a Doctor of Performing Arts. So I'll be completing a portfolio of artistic projects that all have to do with contemporary music, and particularly the singing voice and how it communicates beyond traditional linguistical settings.
Wow, that's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Oh, yes. Well, okay, people will definitely need to go check out your website and keep on track of everything that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing about your process and about everything that came out of these Tiny Works from Quarantine albums and project for you. I think it's super helpful for us to share these stories, to inspire one another and to learn from one another, and to get these ideas about how something tiny can lead to a really large impact in our lives as artists, in the lives of the artists that we work with, and in the community. So thank you so much for your time, Stephanie, and I can't wait to hear what happens next, what you make happen next.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on this. This is really, really wonderful to chat.
Yay, awesome. Thanks so much.